Welcome to our continuing study in the Gospel according to Mark. We have already seen Jesus take Peter, James, and John up on a high mountain where he was transfigured before them. Elijah and Moses appeared and talked with Jesus about the death he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." As they came down from the mountain, they listened as Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one the things you have seen until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." And he had already taught them that he must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. They asked him, "Why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" An interesting question, a question concerning the coming of the Messiah. And they listened as Jesus said, "Elijah truly is coming first and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already." And they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. Likewise, the Son of Man is also about to suffer at their hands. Back with the disciples and a great multitude, Mark records Jesus' words about prayer, his death, having the attitude of a servant, receiving little children in his name, living in such a way that others are not caused to stumble, and drastic spiritual self-surgery to deal with sin. And he added these words to that thought, "For everyone will be salted with fire, and every sacrifice will be salted with salt." Salt is good. But if it loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. That's Mark 9, verses 49 and 50. Jesus spoke of having in mind the things of God, not those of man, obeying the commandments, having treasure in heaven, and he invited, "Come, follow me." On the road going up to Jerusalem, Jesus spoke a third time of his death and resurrection. And then this word about why Jesus, why the Christ, why the Messiah had come. "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Mark 10:45. And all that brings us to this week's study, the exploration of Mark chapters 11 and 12. And here, Jesus is about to allow something he has previously cautioned people not to do. He is allowing his followers to give a public demonstration in his honor. Verses 1 through 10. At Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples, saying, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord has need of it, and immediately he will send it back here.'" Oh, hear Jesus say that again. The Lord, the one supreme in authority, has need of it. Words that tell us God was at work and needed a colt. Why? Well, very simply, and yet oh so marvelously. In Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, riding on an animal that in the eyes of that day was fit for a king, the people spreading their cloaks and leafy branches on the road ahead of him and shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." In all those things, God's messianic promises in Zechariah 9:9, Psalm 118:26, and Psalm 148 verse 1 were being fulfilled. Verse 11 says, "And Jesus entered into Jerusalem, into the temple. And having looked around at all things," all the people, all the stuff, "he left for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late." Jerusalem. Oh, what a day. Bethany, the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, the home of Simon the leper, the place from which Jesus would soon ascend. Oh, think of all the memories Jesus had of that place and the people. Think of all he had seen in the temple that day. Think of all that was ahead. Oh, what a night that had to be. Verses 12 through 14. The next day when they had left Bethany, he was hungry. And having seen a fig tree from a distance with leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, and this is a very literal translation, "No more to the age may no one eat fruit from you." And his disciples were listening. That may sound a bit strange to us, but we should understand, while it wasn't the season for figs, taquash, small knobs or bulbs the size of green almonds, usually grow on fig trees before the leaves. They aren't real figs, but rather forerunners. Oh, and they are good to eat. They're often picked by the poor, and eating them doesn't affect future growth of the figs. When no taquash are found, it is a sign the tree will not be producing fruit. We should also note that it is when the disciples heard Jesus say, "No more to the age," that their ears were captured. They had heard and will again hear Jesus speak of the age and generation. But the word Jesus used here is different. Here, he is specifically speaking of a messianic period, present or future. Next week, in chapter 13, in a parable of the fig tree, Jesus will teach that when you see leaves on a fig tree, you know that summer is near. Likewise, when the signs of his second coming are seen, it should be known that his reappearing is at the very door. Oh, don't miss this. Just like seeing leaves on the fig tree in Mark 11:13 and knowing that summer was near, the signs should have been seen that the age of waiting and watching for the coming of the Messiah was ending. He had come. The new age of waiting and watching for his second coming was about to begin. Interesting, Malachi chapter 3 verse 1 says, "Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple." Indeed, the Lord had come into the temple the day before, looked around at it all, and now, as recorded in Mark 11, verses 15 through 19, Jesus was back in the temple, and he quoted from Isaiah 56, verse 7. Is it not written, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations"? In that passage, the Lord speaks of the sons of foreigners who will join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants and hold fast to his covenant. And he said, "Even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer." Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. But what Jesus found instead was what was spoken through the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 7, verse 11, and Jesus quoted it. "You have made the house, which is called by my name, a den of thieves." Jesus drove out those who were selling and buying on the temple grounds, overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple grounds. Verse 18 says, "The chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to put him to death, for they were afraid of him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching." On page 84 of our study guide, the author gives this observation. It has been reported that a single merchant alone sold over 3,000 sheep per day during the times of the festivals. How could Gentiles pray when such chaos existed in their place of prayer? Warren Wiersbe once said of this scene, "The court of the Gentiles was the one place where the people of Israel should have been doing serious missionary work. But if a Gentile visited the temple and saw what the Jews were doing in the name of the true God, that Gentile would never want to believe what they taught." Verses 20 through 26, "The next morning, they, the disciples, saw the fig tree withered from the roots up. And being reminded, Peter said to him, 'Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered.' Jesus answered, 'Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he is saying, what he says is going to happen, it will be granted to him. Therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted to you. And whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father who is in heaven will also forgive you for your offenses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father who is in heaven forgive your offenses." Page 89 in our study guide points out very clearly and importantly that verse 24 is a plea for a passionate pursuit of God by faith that allows us to see his plans accomplished in us. Believe and receive is not a blank check or a genie in a bottle, but rather a call to tune our hearts to the will of God. In addition to faith, forgiveness is a prerequisite to answered prayer. Those who pray should examine their hearts to see if they are right with others. Well, in the closing verses of chapter 11, the chief priests, scribes, and elders asked Jesus, "By what authority are you doing these things?" In chapter 12, Jesus speaks to them the parable of the vineyard owner. Pharisees and Herodians are sent to him, trying to catch him with a question about taxes. Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, come to Jesus and ask a question about the resurrection. And one of the scribes asks, "Which is the greatest commandment of all?" Oh, friends, Jesus knows what is in their hearts. He knows they have rejected him and are set on killing him. Yet, in all of this, we see the Father's love reaching out, indeed pouring out through Jesus, still trying to open their eyes and turn their hearts back to him. Jesus' first response was a question. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And they knew if they answered from heaven, Jesus would ask, "Then why didn't you believe him?" And they were afraid to say from men because the people all counted John to be a prophet. So they did not even answer. Jesus eventually wrapped up their time together by gently taking them back to King David and thoughts about the Christ, the Messiah, and about the Christ being the Son of God. Verses 35 through 37. How is it that the scribes say that the Christ is the son of David? David himself said in the Holy Spirit, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." David himself calls him Lord. So in what sense is the Christ his son, David's son? Peter, James, and John knew the answer far better than any Pharisee, scribe, or elder, because they had heard the voice from the cloud on the mountain say, "This is my beloved son. Listen to him." And I like Mark chapter 12, verse 37. The large crowd enjoyed listening to Jesus. Mark chapters 11 and 12. Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, was hungry for forerunner fruit, but found none. He came looking for worship, service, and prayer, but found a den of thieves. For faith and forgiveness, but there were just questions and rejection of the Master's ownership, his servants, his son. He came seeking to find people loving the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving their neighbors as themselves. But he found a people who honored the Lord with their lips. Their hearts were far from him. When he comes again, what will he find?